Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
After graduating from medical university, Marlene got a job as a doctor in a psychiatric hospital. She could have continued her postgraduate studies, earned her PhD, and become a professor. She had the opportunity to do so, but on the very day when she had to make a decision about her future, her fiancé broke up with her, unexpectedly, harshly, without much explanation, with a stupid, apologetic smile on his face. Marlene suddenly chose an unexpected path, whether to punish herself or to demonstrate to others the extent of her despair. Soon, she got used to her choice and was even surprised to realize that she liked it. She had more free time, and the money she was now earning came in handy, since otherwise she wouldn't have any income. Her ex-fiancé Raphael had been her only source of income during her studies, and she had fully realized this only when he broke up with her. Before, she wasn't really concerned with the financial side of her life. Her parents tried to help, especially in the first 2 years of her studies, but by the third year they were used to the fact that their daughter could handle everything on her own, and Marlene didn't want to disappoint them now. 2 years of work in the psychiatric hospital went by quickly. During the first months after the breakup with Raphael, Marlene suffered a lot. She waited for his calls, waited for him to apologize and regret his words. Every night she waited for the front door to open. Marlene didn't ask Raphael to return the second key to the apartment. She was looking for chance meetings with the traitor, walking alone along the familiar streets where they used to walk together, but it was all in vain. She had never once met Raphael. Even their mutual friends didn't know much about him, or maybe they didn't want to tell her anything at his request. There were rumors that he had found a job in another city, and before that, he had met another girl. Other rumors said that some wealthy elderly lady had seduced him, and now he was living at her luxurious mansion, like a slave. Marlene suffered for a while, but then she weighed all the pros and cons and calmed down, wrapped herself in a cocoon, hoping to fly out of it after a while as a new creature, a golden-winged butterfly, ready to fly and enjoy all the delights of life. The head doctor helped her a lot, forgave all the blunders that she had during the first year, and even instructed her not only in her work process, but also in the principles of social adaptation in cases when fate was not kind to a person. To Marlene, the head doctor seemed a bit of a weirdo at first. He personally supervised some of the patients, having heart-to-heart conversations with them, played chess with some of them, and promised to improve their knowledge of foreign languages during treatment. They believed him, forgetting the reason why they actually stayed in the psychiatric hospital, but some of them really benefited from it. On Marlene's night shifts, her partner was always a young doctor named Jorge. She used to agree with everything he said because he never tried to seduce her. He was 2 years older than her, and unlike her, he had finished postgraduate studies and was preparing to get his PhD. Psychiatry was his only passion. Jorge was very nice and cheerful, and he knew how to create a relaxed atmosphere around him. He was an interesting person to talk to, he never bothered with any advice, and he saw any problems that sometimes arose in life as an interesting problem to be solved in the most unusual way possible. Every time when dinner was over and the patients obediently took the trays with dirty plates to the kitchen, Jorge sat down under a yellow lamp and worked on his dissertation. One artist from a separate ward for violent and aggressive patients managed to make 3 to 4 drawings for him in the style of Leonardo da Vinci before bedtime. He didn't want to draw for anyone but Jorge, but many people asked him to, especially those who pretended to be insane in order to avoid jail. Probably they just wanted to have something to remember their time among the psychos. Jorge's dissertation was finally finished. He was especially eager to talk, so after Marlene had given the patients the necessary pills before bedtime, they sat at the table and had coffee with cream. "Tomorrow my patient, Sonatas, will be discharged," Jorge said. He had been treating this patient for 2 months and was pleased with the positive outcome of the treatment. He swore that he would never go to the stadium again, and he was sick of the red color now. He decided to root for a different soccer team. "If I were him, I'd forget about soccer forever. I hope the relapse doesn't happen." "Oh, I hope so, too. That's my first successful patient. And it's a huge plus for my dissertation. Do you know what this hospital is famous for?" No, what is it famous for? Have you heard about the ghost of the old countess? I have. Some patients in the women's ward even claim to have seen her. No, besides that, Jorge shook his head. I don't know anything else. Marlene looked at her colleague curiously. There is something more interesting. And it even has some mystical connection with my patient. The countess is just a myth. Really? Marlene was genuinely surprised. Tell me. 3 years ago, a mysterious patient was admitted to one of our wards, Jorge whispered, Pablo Rojas, a writer. Parkinson's syndrome developed because of alcohol addiction, at least that's what people say. And there's a rumor that this writer is a brother of a very powerful person in the government. He was brought here in a limousine with many guards. No way, Marlene said in a whisper. Yeah, it sounds unbelievable, but I heard it from people I trust. Wow. I've never heard of it. Which ward it was? No one can say. At first, I thought it was the writer from room 112. His name is Pablo, too. But I looked in his papers, his last name's different, and he's much younger. It must be very difficult for his attending physician. Working with the relatives of politicians is like walking on a razor's edge. I have also heard that our head doctor initially was his attending physician when he was still an ordinary doctor, and 2 years later, he was suddenly promoted to head doctor. Apparently, the treatment was in the right direction, or he got a bonus for his silence. That explains why our head doctor is so weird. Jorge grinned. Yeah, he likes to pretend to fall asleep right in the middle of a conversation with some patient. He can lean back in his chair and snore, but he actually watches the reaction of the patient. He thinks it's the main method of distinguishing a real psycho from someone who's pretending to be a psycho. What's the secret? I'm not sure, it's his own technique. I suppose it's just one of his oddities. There are much more reliable methods. Who will you be treating after Sonatas? Some old man will be here tomorrow. His kids decided to place him here. He's in his 70s. He's got Alzheimer's and other related problems. Is there any hope for improvement in his condition? Or no chance? I don't know yet. Maybe his kids just want to get rid of the burden. The kids aren't poor, and their father was a rich, successful man when he was younger. He was a famous geologist or something like that. He published many books, was head of a department at the university in the capital. I feel so sorry for him. If his children really decided to get rid of him, he'd never get out of here, even if his condition improved. I don't want to deal with such a patient right before I quit. Are you going to quit? Marlene looked at Jorge with surprise. If I get my PhD, and I have no doubt I will get it, of course I will quit. I don't want to work here forever. As they say, great deeds are ahead of me. Too bad, the girl lowered her eyes. Who will I have to work with then? I'm used to you. You're nice. Jorge grinned again. Then pray for my failure and not getting my PhD. Oh, come on. You have no chance of failure. I'm sure you will succeed. I regret that I didn't apply for a postgraduate program myself. Yeah, Jorge said. Love that drives the sun and the light. And then added, and makes people do unforgivable stupid things. They were silent for a while, finishing another cup of coffee. Then Jorge hesitated for a while and finally said, Look, I know it's not nice, but still, I can't help but ask you for one favor. Tell me. I won't stay here for more than a month anyway. I haven't informed my superiors yet. Could you start treating this old man? Not because it might be a hopeless case. Maybe it's not as bad as I think it is. I just feel sorry for him, you know? If the head doctor will treat him after I quit, he'll be lucky. But if Arturo will treat him, it'll be a nightmare. He's a sadist. Apart from enemas, he doesn't offer any other treatment. He'll kill this poor scientist. But you're good, you're kind. If you treat him, he'll have a chance for a normal life. What do you think, Marlene? To be honest, the girl suspected that this was exactly what Jorge would ask her to do, but his arguments were strong. Both the head doctor and Arturo, nicknamed Maniac, they'd ruin the patient's life. Especially if Arturo will be transferred from the women's ward, where he constantly prescribed enemas to everyone. So what do you think? Jorge interrupted her thoughts. I'll be very grateful to you. When I get a good position in a research institute, I will definitely hire you. You're very smart. No one will ever appreciate your work here. And believe me, it's not just gratitude. It's just that I can see my own prospects and other people's. I'll need smart, hard-working people in my team. Marlene had no doubt that it would work out that way, and she agreed. She agreed, both because she didn't intend to stay at the hospital for long, and mostly because she was afraid of night shifts with Arturo, the maniac. The next morning, an elderly man was admitted to the hospital. While Marlene had the day off and was relaxing at home, Jorge went to work overtime, not on his scheduled shift. He decided to fill out all the necessary paperwork so that another doctor could treat the old patient. The head doctor was fine with it. The patient's children didn't really mind, too. Jorge even promised special attention and care, praised Marlene's professional and personal qualities in every possible way, and did it so persistently that the elderly man's children even voiced their willingness to reward Marlene with a small sum of money every week. Maybe they took Jorge's words for hidden extortion, or maybe there was still a remnant of humanity in them, which is difficult to remove from the human soul. In any case, everyone was satisfied with the deal except Marlene. She was a little upset about the money part of the deal, but it was stupid to refuse. Besides, if she refused, the patient's children might doubt whether their father would receive the promised care and attention, and request another doctor for their father. And Jorge, in his last month of work, was treating a soldier who had slashed his wrists in the train station restroom. He wanted to do something good before quitting this hospital and give the poor guy a certificate that he was no longer able to serve in the army. But the doctor couldn't do it. A week before the medical examination, the soldier's case was transferred to Erica de Sergio, a bitch who, on the contrary, did everything possible to bring the guy back to the military unit. After the examination, he took pills from other patients in the ward, mixing antipsychotics with tranquilizers, and at night he took all the pills he had. The nurses found him in the morning. It wasn't easy to save him, but the doctors did it. He was given a gastric lavage and morphine injection, and 3 hours later he was sent back to the military unit, even though his tongue was barely moving. Jorge quit earlier than he'd planned. He quarreled with Erica so much that she even complained about him to the ministry. And in that nervous condition, he couldn't even talk to Marlene. So, Marlene was left without a partner, concentrating all her strength and knowledge on the poor old man. Marlene was doing very well. Sergio turned out to be a very nice old man. In the moments when his memory became clear, which usually happened just before bedtime, he would tell her stories from his life, how he traveled around the world during geological expeditions, spending the long summer seasons in the forests and mountains, untraveled paths, unknown animals, some fantastic incidents. Sergio's stories became more and more extraordinary every night. Marlene was a very loyal listener, trying not to interrupt by asking questions. She was really interested, though she realized that the old man was probably making up half of his stories or adding some fantastical details to the ordinary everyday life of geologists. On one of such evenings, Sergio told Marlene one especially interesting story. It was 1974, he began. It was an unusual expedition to Burma. It is also known as Myanmar. Marlene, have you ever been to Myanmar or Thailand? No, Sergio. Not yet. I was studying, and I couldn't afford to travel. Yes, I understand, the old man replied. Just try to imagine what it was like in the 70s. Simple people could only dream about international trips. So they sent their 5 people. In addition to 3 geologists, there were 2 guys from the government special service. They were silent and stern. God only knows why they were watching us all this time. The civil war was still going on in Burma. The government was fighting the communist opposition. The communists were joined by rebels of all sorts and ethnic minorities. The country was being torn apart. That trip was dangerous. Geologists were treated normally on both sides. At least that's what we were told. Maybe just to keep us from getting nervous and distracted from our tasks, and the task was an exploration of jade and ruby resources. The government of Burma was also interested in it, as well as various criminal groups connected with the smuggling. Rice fields are often mixed with opium fields. Everyone was trying to make a profit in every possible way. We were sent to exactly such regions somewhere in the southeast in the jungle. We got there safely. In my hometown, it was freezing, but there it was plus 30 Celsius. But the rains never stopped for a minute. We reached the right location according to the map, set up camp and some basic equipment, and began to work. For 2 days, we were looking for any signs of the presence of crystals, but there were no results. We needed to move the camp another 10 kilometers to the south. I went to check the location beforehand. I turned out to be the strongest of all. Others lost their strength because of the weather and the change in climate. They didn't want to use the whole brigade unnecessarily. I left the camp early in the morning, got to the spot, and checked it out. By indirect signs, there were deposits of ruby there. In the evening I came back to the camp, but there was no one there. The tents were tattered, and coals from the fire were scattered across the meadow. It looked like something had exploded, and everyone had panicked. There were shell casings, the grass was crumpled. The smaller trees were broken. My first thought was that some local rebels had either captured or chased after the geologists who had managed to run away. But what could I do? I had to get out of there somehow. At night I was sitting there without a fire, trembling, and hoping that someone would come back for me if anyone was still alive. But no one ever came back to the camp. But I didn't find any maps or documents in the tents. All the papers were gone. The equipment was damaged. There was only 1 can of turkey left, and I had only a tablet with a compass and a hand-drawn map of the area where I went in the morning. I decided to head strictly to the north. Sooner or later I'll find some village anyway. I just need to avoid opium plantations. Thank God the rain had stopped, but the mosquitoes began to torment me. I walked without stopping till noon and came to the river. It was quite wide, with a very strong current. On the way here we didn't see any rivers, and unfortunately, I can't swim at all. I didn't learn to swim as a child, and then I didn't consider it a vital skill. I went downstream, to the east. I kept going until dusk, no bridges, no villages, and not a single person. It seemed that even all the animals had escaped somewhere. In one place the river became narrower. I decided to take the risk and cross it. I took off my clothes and put them in a plastic bag. The water was cold and dirty. My leg was cramped right away. Before I could take even one step, I tripped and fell, and the current carried me around the bend. I tried to move my arms, to swim, fighting against the water, but I couldn't do anything. The water carried me farther and farther away. Around the corner, there were rapids and the terrain was rocky. The difference in level was quite small, only about 3 meters, but I hit the rock with my head so hard that I lost consciousness and I don't remember what was happening next. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't understand where I was. I was lying in a hut, my head wrapped in bandages, warmth coming from the fire. The hut was like a veranda, it was uncovered. It was night, and there was nobody around. Only my dry clothes were near the fire and an aluminum mug with water. I got up and realized that not only my head was injured, but also my leg. Apparently it was fractured. The pain made my eyes blurred. Suddenly, I saw a girl sitting in front of me, just like you are now. Sergio was silent for a second, and his eyes became wet. Not a girl, but an angel. I have never seen such beauty in my life. I was married at the time and had a little son waiting for me at home, but the moment I saw this angel, I realized that I had fallen in love and could do nothing about it. Her name was Nuna. As she said, she was 22 years old, but she looked like a real child, skinny, short, with delicate facial features. As I learned later, almost all Burmese and Thai women look younger than they are. She knew English quite well. At first, it was surprising to me, a girl in a tropical wilderness, speaking foreign languages and reading Edgar Poe in English. She lived in this hut with her father. Her father was away most of the time, doing some important business, as she said. But don't think anything bad. We just talked. I didn't even dare to confess my feelings to her. And then, when my leg healed and it was time to get out of here, I finally found out who she really was. Marlene, I realize you don't believe half of what I'm telling you. You probably think, here's just a crazy old man trying to impress everyone around. Come on, Sergio, she objected, though she realized that the old man was right. I'm ready to listen to your stories forever. All right, sweetheart. If I were you, I probably wouldn't believe it either, but I swear I didn't make up any of the details. Everything is true. So who was Nuna? A princess. What? Marlene was surprised. Yes, a real princess from a very ancient Burmese family. She and her father were hiding in the jungle from the communists who were hunting them. She didn't explain why they had a grudge against them. But the communists promised to pay a lot of money to anyone who would bring them their heads, so they had to hide from all the other gangs too. They took a big risk nursing me back to health and telling the truth about themselves, especially when they decided to send me back to the big world. I could have sold information about where they were hiding. But they had plans for me. By that time, they were preparing to move to another country. But they wanted to take all their family valuables with them. They needed to smuggle it all across the border somehow. There were some old documents, photographs, and a little over 1 kilogram of jewelry. Nuna's father showed me everything. I've never seen anything like that before. A beauty worthy of a queen. One day Nuna came to me wearing a marvelous dress with bracelets, necklaces, and rings on each of her fingers. I was dazzled. My heart burst out of my chest as I looked at her. How could I betray her? How could I refuse her? Maybe she understood that's why she trusted me unconditionally. I agreed. The next day they handed me 2 suitcases. One contained some of my belongings and modest gifts. The other contained samples from the area where expedition members had been sent. The second suitcase had a secret compartment where they put their treasures. I was supposed to get it all out of Burma and then wait for Nuna and her father. They led me by secret paths to the nearest safe village. From there I walked alone to my country's embassy. None of my team was ever found. What had happened in the camp and where everyone had gone remained a mystery to this day. I told the embassy my story, changing my rescuers to simple villagers. I don't think they believed me, but they didn't insist on the details. Moreover, the suitcases with samples and gifts were sent by diplomatic mail directly to my native city, where I safely picked them up and brought them home. Either no one really cared, or there were some arrangements that I was not supposed to know about. Oh, if I had a Nuna like her, I would write a love song for her. Someone said on the bed in the same room. A patient who named himself John Lennon and was listening attentively to Sergio's story decided to make a comment. The old man smiled. Yes, my friend John, Nuna was nice. Yeah, he agreed and closed his eyes, obviously imagining singing for that unusual girl. I'm so tired, Marlene, Sergio said, closing his eyes. It hurts to think about it. 40 years have passed, and yet the memory is as vivid as if it were yesterday. Marlene, I begin to forget it often, but I have not yet told everything about my beautiful Nuna and about you. About me? Marlene was surprised. Yes, darling, about you. But we'll talk about that some other time. I'm tired, besides you probably don't want to spend the whole night with an old crazy man. You have work to do. All right, Sergio. We'll continue this conversation another time. Good night. Nuna. I wish I had a girl like that, John Lennon muttered again and turned to his other side. For the next few evenings, Sergio never returned to the story of the Burmese princess. His memory lapses became more frequent. Sometimes he even began to forget his own name. He only came back to reality when Marlene was on shift. The tests showed that the disease was progressing. He had developed heart failure, which prevented him from taking the necessary medications. All of these medications were affecting the heart in one way or another. Arturo was finally removed from the female ward. Fortunately for Marlene, he was not her partner, but unfortunately for Sergio, he came to Sergio's section during his shifts. When there were bathing days, all the women would come to the men's section to bathe because renovations were going on in the female ward shower room. On such days, Arturo was a very kind man. He literally drooled. He would take the women into the showers as if they were a flock of sheep and spend all the time there until the last woman had finished showering. He made sure the women didn't fight over a bar of soap and helped them shave their legs if they asked for it. It was unclear why Arturo was entrusted with such a mission. But any other day, Arturo was as cruel as usual. The enema sticking out of his pocket spoke for itself. Even John tried not to bother him with his stories on such days. Marlene complained to the head doctor, pointing out Arturo's outrageous behavior towards patients, but he only told her to look for common ground with her colleagues. It sounded ridiculous. Marlene was ready to scratch that pervert's eyes out. But after a few conversations with Marlene, Arturo seemed to sense her determination and calmed down a bit. It was strange for Marlene that Arturo, who looked so brave and bold, turned out to be a total coward. Even the patients sensed this and began to fight back, and one night they caught him in the toilet at the moment when he abused one of the patients, and performed a special operation called enema under the guidance of the artist and to the joyful exclamations of John Lennon. And from that night on, Arturo never showed up in their ward again. Sergio began to recall the events of the past again, but his stories were getting shorter, and he never talked about Nuna again. To cheer him up, Marlene ordered him an unusual notebook as a gift. It was a real 300-page book with a beautiful cover with jumble patterns and the words "The Last Expedition" on it, but the pages were blank. Marlene hoped that Sergio would be able to fill them in himself. He was delighted at this attention. Armed with a pen, he spent half a day writing his notes and even invited an artist from the next room to decorate the book. The artist read the stories and illustrated them with marvelous drawings. This went on for about 2 months. Sergio wouldn't let Marlene read. She was the only one who didn't know what he was writing about. But the old man promised that as soon as he finished, he would give her the book and even dedicate it to her. However, his health was getting worse every week, and he began to have heart attacks at night. Marlene realized that he had only a few days left to live. He no longer told stories every evening. He would lie silent, staring at the ceiling. Marlene would sit beside him and hold his hand until he fell asleep. John, who had recently returned to his previous room from the ward for the aggressive patients, watched the whole scene in silence, looking at Marlene with childishly kind gray eyes. One February morning, when the snow was melting, revealing the pale previous year's grass, Sergio, who had woken up early, came to Marlene, who was dozing under a yellow lamp. "Here," he said quietly, placing his book in front of the girl. "I have finished it. Now you can read it. Read to the end. In the last chapter, you will learn a lot of important things for me and perhaps for yourself too. All right, Sergio. You're up early. How are you feeling?" "Now I'm good, Marlene. Now everything is good. Thanks to you." He gestured for the girl not to object. "You'll understand everything when you finish reading it." And Marlene didn't object. At home, she read the first 100 pages. Some of the stories were ones she had heard from Sergio, but some were new. The artist's beautiful illustrations were a delight to her eyes. The animals, drawn according to the old man's description, looked so mysterious. There were also landscapes of the wild forest, people around a campfire, singing to a guitar. In this company, Marlene easily recognized Sergio. The artist depicted him young, but he managed to emphasize the main features of his appearance so that it was impossible not to recognize him. She was surrounded by so many talented people, even though they were a little crazy. Marlene went to her next shift with the intention of expressing her admiration for both the artist and Sergio, but her wish was not destined to be realized. At work, she was informed that Sergio had passed away at 4 o'clock this afternoon. His heart had stopped. The old man's children, who had never visited him in the last 2 months, came to pick up the body the next day. Marlene knew that lately, before completely forgetting about their father, they had been arguing with him a lot, demanding something from him. They wanted him to either sign some papers or tell them where the papers were. Sergio did not react to the scolding and hysterics in any way. He just kept silent with his eyes lowered to the floor. Apparently, having failed to get any results from him, the brother and sister disappeared, but they continued to transfer money to Marlene's account. She hadn't withdrawn a penny of the money she had accumulated, hoping to give it all back one day. A little later, she learned that Sergio's relatives had taken his body to the city where they lived. No one invited her to the funeral, but she felt it her duty to see off the man who had dedicated a whole book to her. He had become almost like a part of her family during this short time. In the psychiatry faculty, they were told not to become attached to their patients, or they would eventually go insane due to the endless losses. Only now did Marlene understand this advice, but she couldn't help herself. She took a vacation, bought a ticket to that city, and at midnight on February 25th got on the train. The day was very sunny and warm. The hot sun was fiercely drowning the snow that had spread over the roads, and the warm wind was drying the soil where Marlene's sharp heels were sticking. Marlene didn't have much choice of clothing for such a situation. As a result, she was dressed unsuitable for both the weather and her mood. Despite the sad occasion, her thoughts were wandering around the still-living Sergio. It would be too cruel for the old man to live a few more years in their godforsaken hospital. Of course, he could still entertain both the girl and his unfortunate companions with interesting stories, but it was not real life, but only painful attempts to grasp at the past, which was fading away with each passing week and becoming like barely visible shadows. Sergio probably realized it himself, and that's why he left life with consciousness and dignity, having had time to make the right conclusions. Marlene had never thought about God or heaven before, but at those moments, when she entered the cemetery gate, she suddenly realized that heaven existed. She could almost see it, feel it with her skin, hear the joyful voices and laughter, feel the heat from the fire surrounded by bearded men singing songs to the guitar. And it seemed as if Sergio was even waving to her and pointing with his finger somewhere towards the east. She looked there and saw an amazingly beautiful girl hurrying to join the company of bearded men. Marlene knew it was Princess Nuna. Right. Now they would surely meet and tell each other about the things they couldn't tell 40 years ago. Marlene was late for the farewell ceremony. The coffin with the body was already being buried in the grave, but she thought it was for the best. She didn't want to see pale Sergio with his arms crossed across his chest. She wanted to remember him alive. Not many people came to say the last goodbye to him. Sergio's son and daughter and some other man were standing in front of the others. Marlene could only see their backs. At a distance, as if afraid to approach them, there were another 7 people. She recognized 2 of them, although she had never met them in person, elderly men, a little younger than the deceased. It was unbelievable, but the artist managed to illustrate their faces perfectly correctly in Sergio's book. How could this be possible? Marlene didn't know. One of the men nodded slightly, looking at her face curiously, and said something to his companion. He also looked at Marlene, and it was clear how much surprised he was. Marlene was confused by this. How could they possibly know her? Sergio had never had visitors at the hospital other than his children. The 3 people in the front row threw handfuls of soil on the coffin, letting the others come closer for the ceremony. The man standing beside the brother and sister turned his face toward Marlene for a second, and her heart raced. What the hell was going on today? The man's face was an exact copy of her ex-boyfriend Raphael. This was crazy. How could he be here? Everyone seemed familiar to her today, as if she had fallen out of the real world and was surrounded by the ghosts of the past. Marlene threw a handful of soil on the coffin lid, turned around, and met the eyes of an old man who had greeted her with a nod of his head a moment ago. Be careful, he said quietly. What? She asked fearfully. My condolences, the old man said loudly. She must have just misheard the first phrase. Why would he suddenly say something like that to her? Maybe he thought Marlene might have slipped on the melting snow. Her imagination went wild the minute she started thinking about heaven. Marlene shivered, shook her hands off the soil, and headed toward the cemetery exit. She wasn't going to the memorial dinner, and she didn't want to draw attention to herself in any way. She had only come here for Sergio's sake. Nothing else was keeping her here. People slowly made their way to dirty cars, wiping their muddy shoes on the wet snow. Only a guy who looked like Raphael, heading straight for the exit. Marlene walked about 5 meters behind him. She looked at him once again, and the resemblance was striking. Even his gait and his habit of keeping his hands in his pockets resembled Raphael. Raphael? She called in a low voice. The boy didn't turn around, but quickened his pace. Marlene walked faster, too, and when she almost caught up with the stranger, she repeated a little more confidently and louder. Raphael. The man turned around, and Marlene's heart raced again. There could be no doubt now. It was Raphael. Marlene? He stopped. It seemed to Marlene that he wasn't surprised when he said it. Instead, he looked a little confused and even displeased at the unexpected meeting. What are you doing here? He asked. I wanted to ask you the same question. Did you know Sergio? We are friends. With Barbara and Aldo, Raphael took cigarettes out of his cigarette case and lit up. Sergio was their father. I was his attending physician. Really? What a twist of fate. Since when do attending physicians go to their patients' funerals? He was a special patient for me. You've always been very sensitive, Raphael smiled slightly. Although, as far as I know, Barbara's father knew how to quickly impress and attach people to him. Apparently, he still had that ability, even after he lost his memory. And Barbara is your... Yes, Raphael interrupted Marlene, she is my new soulmate. So, Marlene said in a low voice, the rumors are true. What rumors? That you're living with a woman who's much older than you. She's not much older than me. Raphael tossed his finished cigarette to the roadside and spat. She's 38. 10 years difference isn't that much. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. It's none of my business. Why didn't you go to the memorial dinner? I don't like that kind of event. They barely talked me into going to the cemetery. So, why was Sergio such a special patient for you? Did he tell you his fake stories about his adventures, too? He was just a nice person. He was. And his fake stories, as you called them, had nothing to do with it, although everyone listened to them with pleasure. Psychos? Raphael grinned wryly. No wonder. The hostility with which he spoke of Sergio made Marlene uncomfortable. She was glad Raphael had broken up with her. There was something cold about him, freezing her soul. She wanted to end this conversation quickly, to demand the key to her apartment, and to say goodbye to that toxic shadow from her past. And yet she wanted to object somehow, to protect herself and the memory of the old man. You know, said Marlene, Sergio was not only a storyteller. He was a great writer, and he even dedicated his book to me. A book? This time Raphael was genuinely surprised. What book? He was writing a diary with his memories while he was in the hospital. And in the next room, there was an artist who decorated his notes with illustrations. Eventually, he created a book. He gave it to me before he died. So, the people you call psychos are actually more talented than most normal people. What was in that book? Raphael smoked again. Is it interesting? Stories. About what? About a lot of different things. Stories and wonderful illustrations. Mountain landscapes and travel maps? Maps, landscapes, people, animals. Can I borrow that book? I'd like to read it. No. You won't like it. You're not a psycho. Okay, Raphael frowned and stopped. I was just kidding. Anyway, it was nice to see you. I got some business to take care of. Can I give you a ride somewhere? No, thanks. Goodbye. Oh, and, can I have my key back, please? I had to tell you about it long ago. Don't worry about it. I lost it long ago. Probably in my previous rented apartment. But if you're worried, change the lock. Bye. Raphael turned left out of the cemetery gate, where he left his brand new black Renault, and Marlene went to the right in the direction of the train station. The unpleasant feeling of the encounter haunted her all the way to the station. Why did she even tell him about the book? Why was she justifying herself? Stupid. Raphael is probably laughing right now, enjoying his superiority. He's got a rich girlfriend, an expensive car, and everything must be going well. And Marlene demands some key that Raphael has forgotten about long ago. What a fool. A real fool. She hoped he was deliberately not returning the key so he could show up to visit her one day. She was still jealous, and she didn't want to confess it to herself. And Raphael didn't even ask her how she was doing. He wasn't surprised that she was working in a psychiatric hospital, which meant that she didn't apply for the postgraduate program she dreamed of. She was nothing to him, useless waste material. He'd probably noticed her before when they were still standing near the grave. He'd noticed her, but he didn't want to talk to her. That's why he wasn't surprised when she called out to him. When Marlene returned home in the evening, exhausted and broken, she had another unpleasant surprise. The apartment door was unlocked. At first, she thought she had forgotten to lock it, but when she entered the apartment, she realized that things were much worse. Everything in the room had been turned upside down, chairs were overturned, all the drawers of cabinets and dressers had been pulled out and their contents scattered on the carpet. Even the books were all on the floor. The first thing Marlene did was rush to the papers and money she had been saving just in case. But everything was in its place, safe and sound. She had never had any jewelry at all. What were the thieves looking for then? Marlene sat helplessly on the floor and, looking around the mess with helpless eyes, tried to find common sense in the actions of the burglars. There was no sense at all. They hadn't even stolen her bank card, from which she had just yesterday transferred all the money Sergio and his children had sent her over the past 3 months. Marlene inspected the lock on the door. There was no sign of breaking in. It had been opened accurately, as if with a key. Nothing made sense. She wanted to call her neighbor to ask if she'd seen any strange people near their building, but she didn't dare. She didn't know her neighbors very well, and she didn't want to draw attention to herself, especially now. Who would suddenly become interested in her in this crazy world? She couldn't imagine such people. Thank God the thieves hadn't touched much in the kitchen. Marlene boiled the kettle, poured a large mug of coffee, and cried like a little girl. Then she took her handbag, found a pack of cigarettes, intended for John Lennon from the psychiatric hospital, and smoked. The last time she had smoked was at the age of 19 during her second year of college, but at that moment the long-forgotten habit suddenly flared up with new vigor, as if there were no years that separated Marlene from the glorious student period. Marlene inhaled and coughed. She examined the pack carefully. It was the kind of cigarette she usually smoked before, but now the flavor was disgusting. She extinguished the cigarette under the tap water and threw it in the trash can. After finishing her coffee and crying until her eyes were red, Marlene went back to her room and began to put her stuff in order. She put the linens back, put the chairs back in their original positions, put all the papers in one folder, and suddenly realized that something was missing: her red lace Victoria's Secret underwear, which she had bought 3 years ago after waiting in line for 6 hours in the cold January weather. She'd only worn them once, on the night of her and Raphael's anniversary. It was too weird. Did the thieves come for her underwear? She laughed. What nonsense. Maybe she just put her underwear somewhere else. But no. The red silk robe from the lingerie set was lying in its place, but the panties were obviously missing. Whoever these thieves were, they clearly had a problem with imagination. Strangely enough, this fact cheered Marlene up. She was just finishing putting the books back on the shelves when Sergio's last expedition got into her hands. Picking it up, Marlene noticed that a photograph had fallen out of the book. The girl picked up the picture and took a closer look. No way! She couldn't believe her eyes. She, Marlene Gallardo, was looking at her from the picture, only very young and wearing strange clothes that she never had. The picture was old, cracked, and yellowed by time, but her face was clearly visible. Dark eyes, high cheekbones. People always thought Marlene was from Asia. She got those facial features from her father, who actually didn't know which of his ancestors had such Asian features. It was too much for just one day. There was no way that Marlene was in that photo. She had to find the answer in a book. The girl opened the last chapter Sergio had told her about and began to read. I waited for over a month, hoping that Nuna and her father would soon be knocking on my door, but that never happened. I went back to work. Everything went on as usual. I got a bonus for the samples from Burma delivered to the institute. There was no news about the missing expedition members. Despite the separation, Nuna's image never ceased to torment my heart. My wife seemed to sense it and asked me in every possible way whether I had fallen out of love with her and whether I was planning something evil. I felt guilty. I loved her, I loved our son. For months later, learning that we would have another child, I was sincerely happy about it, but it was a completely different love, familiar, simple, cozy, not requiring any tension. I saw my feelings for Nuna differently. This amazing girl sounded in my soul as an echo of something heavenly, equal to the real miracle. But the fear for her fate grew stronger every day. I began to read the newspapers, hoping to find news about the latest events in Burma. And one day such news caught my eye. A father and daughter of a noble Burmese family had been captured and later killed by a group hostile to both the government and the communists, and a great price had been paid for their heads. The news didn't mention their names or any specific information, but everything was clear to me. I left with my suitcase to my old summer house, telling my wife that I was going on a business trip, and spent the whole day there shedding bitter tears, thinking about my princess who had died in agony. And yet I could have been wrong. The news could have been about a different family that had nothing to do with Nuna. It was a poor reason to keep believing, but it lurked in my heart as a burning fire. I took the jewelry out of the secret compartment, not knowing what to do with it. I could safely keep the papers at home, but there was no way I could explain the presence of these treasures at my home. I took the jewelry in my hands, thinking about the princess and her dance in the light of a tropical sunset. I had to hide the memory of my love in the deepest corner of my heart and bury the jewelry in the woods so that I would never have to carry them in my suitcase again. So, I kept them in a safe place. Dear Marlene, this chapter is written exclusively for you. Only you know its contents if you have read my book to the end, as I asked you to. The artist from the hospital also knows everything, because I asked him to draw a map with the exact coordinates of my hiding place. You may not believe me and think that I was completely crazy at the very end. But I'm relying on your intuition. The photo you found in the book is a photo of my Princess Nuna. I can only imagine how surprised you were when you saw it for the first time. Now you see why I'm so attached to you. You two are like twin sisters. As soon as I saw you in the hospital, it was like I was resurrected. My memory, which had almost left me by then, came back to life. Everything came alive inside me, every detail, every minute of the delight I had once experienced. Luckily, you turned out to be a very good person, which is such a rare thing in the modern world, a combination of kindness and beauty. Just don't say a word to my children. Stay away from them. They know the treasure exists. I must have talked about it a lot when I was delirious, so they assumed it was true. It is wrong to speak of my children in such a way, but unfortunately, they have grown up to be bad people. Maybe I didn't spend enough time with them. I don't deny my guilt. But the fact is that I can't entrust them with the most precious possession of my life. My poor wife is probably cursing me in the other world for saying such things, but I can't change reality. It's not bracelets or rings that I call my most precious possessions. I hope you know what I mean. I can take my love with me to the other world, but I can't take the jewelry. So let my treasure remain here on earth, but only in the good hands of a decent person. I bequeath them to you, my dear. You alone can fulfill this role. That's what fate has decided. Go to my summer house, find that place on the map, and you'll find it. But be careful. If something goes wrong at the last moment. Anyway, I don't think that anything will go wrong if you're smart enough, you won't let it happen. The treasure is buried under a picturesque old tree, you will definitely notice it. The tree is still there. I checked it before I completely lost my mind. It has a thick, sharp branch. Don't touch it under any circumstances. Don't touch it with your hands. It's dangerous. I think that's the end of my story. Be happy, Marlene, and don't forget the old man who dedicated this book to you. It's time for me to go to my beloved Nuna. Goodbye. Marlene spent 2 days coming to her senses, crying, and then reading Sergio's memoirs again. On the 3rd day, she finally pulled herself together. First of all, she changed the lock on the door. Then she went to the store, where she bought a garden shovel and a compass. She didn't ask her neighbor about anything, though she met her at the entrance on her way back from shopping and chatted for about 10 minutes. She had to lie about the shovel, saying she was going to her parents' country house. Marlene took the train to the village mentioned in Sergio's book. In rubber boots, blue raincoat, and with a backpack behind her shoulders, she looked almost the same as the other villagers. Spring came early this year. The sun was shining, sometimes hidden behind rare clouds, which inevitably caused rains. Long-nosed grackles were diligently digging in the fields, pretending to be agronomists. The last bullfinches and bluebirds had already migrated outside the city, preparing to return to the forest for the whole summer, lose their bright winter plumage, and get lost in the foliage of the trees. The mud crunched underfoot. Marlene could hear the snow melting on the roadsides hissing. It was impossible not to smile at the sight of it all. Marlene smiled, even though her thoughts were still wandering around the unhappy recent events. Were the thieves looking for Sergio's book? This thought had occurred to her only this morning when the locksmith in glasses was scrutinizing her old lock. So, do you think that thieves have picked the lock? Yes, that's right, she answered. Either a pro did it, or someone who had a key, the locksmith concluded. Only Raphael had the key, but Marlene had seen him at the cemetery the day someone broke into her apartment. The brother and sister were there, too. Sergio said that the children had guessed that the treasure existed. One day she even heard them arguing about some papers. Were they looking for a map? Stupid. She told Raphael about the book. No. It's impossible. Well, theoretically, he could get to her city much faster by car than she could get there by train. But it all seemed silly and weird. How could he possibly know about her patient's history? Nonsense. But then who could have known she kept that book at home? It took Marlene almost an hour to get from the train station to Sergio's summer house. The houses in this area were mostly abandoned. It was clear from their cracked roofs, broken glass in the windows, and fences that leaned to the ground. Sergio's house looked decent enough against all the other houses. Marlene took out her compass and checked the map. The direction was toward the forest, which was about 100 meters from the house. Here the ground, which had not been smashed by cars, was getting harder, so it was easier to walk. She had to go deeper into the forest for another 200 meters. Finally, the desired location opened in front of her eyes. It was a very small glade, overgrown with low shrubbery, sprinkled with water droplets, and with a huge anthill around the trunk of a thick oak tree. Not far from the oak tree, Marlene saw the very driftwood that the artist had drawn in the book. She had to dig right next to it. Marlene thought she heard something crunching behind her. She turned around and listened. It was quiet, only a stream was babbling somewhere. She took off her backpack, unfolded the folding shovel, and began to dig. Her heart was pounding excitedly in her chest. It was easy to dig, the soil was moist and soft. Marlene had gone about a meter deep when the blade of the shovel hit something hard. She threw the shovel away and began to dig with her hands. Yes, Sergio wasn't lying that the treasure did exist. It was a box, a wooden box wrapped in cloth and plastic wrap. When Marlene opened it, the sunlight reflected by the diamond blinded her for a second. Yes, it was exactly what the old man was talking about. Bracelets, rings, necklaces, earrings, and gold chains. It must have cost a lot of money, considering not only the stones and precious metals, but the history of the jewelry itself. Of course, Marlene never thought for a minute about selling it all. She also didn't want to keep it all for herself, even though Sergio had bequeathed the jewelry to her. Marlene was already thinking about how to give the treasures to their true heirs somewhere in Burma. The girl continued to stand in the pit, looking at the colorful stones and hesitating to touch them with her hand when a voice suddenly sounded above her head. Well, there's our princess. Well, hello there. It's been a while." Marlene shuddered and looked up. It was Raphael. "You," she said in surprise. "You weren't expecting me?" "I knew you were the only one who could break into my apartment, but I didn't want to believe it." "Good for you. You did the right thing. Now, baby, please give me the box and I'll leave as quietly as I came." "Go to hell, bastard," Marlene said loudly, surprised at her own courage. Her thoughts began to work in her head with lightning speed. "Oh, I'm so scared." Raphael grinned, and a gun appeared in his hand. "I'm not going to count to 3. This is not a movie, sweetheart. If I bury you in this hole, no one will ever find you. You ain't got no friends, and nobody knows where you went this morning. Don't be stupid. I'll pull the trigger. I mean it." Tears involuntarily streamed from Marlene's eyes. Would it really end like this? Would all Sergio's requests and feelings be buried here with Marlene? So trivial, at gunpoint and under the gaze of some shameless scoundrel? But what could she do? If he left her alive, would there be any chance of somehow turning things in the right direction? Not likely. Legally, she was not related to Sergio and had no right to claim anything. Moreover, the case could even turn against her, since she was Sergio's attending physician and had the motive and opportunity to drive him to his grave out of self-interest. Now this crazy family will sell the jewelry along with the historical documents to some bargainer. The money will be enough to buy one more house, one more car, and maybe even to live happily for the rest of their pathetic lives. It was so unfair and disgusting. Marlene wiped away her tears, smearing the mud from her wet gloves on her cheeks, grasped the driftwood with one hand, and placed the box in front of Raphael with the other. The driftwood shifted slightly under the weight of her body, and Sergio's words about the driftwood flashed in her head. He had told her not to touch it under any circumstances. What if? All right, she's got nothing to lose. If she pressed it harder, something would definitely happen. Marlene didn't doubt any of Sergio's words now, and she didn't have any other options anyway. So, she hung onto that mysterious driftwood with her whole body. It worked like a lever. With a creak, it turned 90 degrees downward and stopped. The sound of last year's leaves rising into the air could be heard from behind the driftwood. In a moment, Raphael's body flew upward, entangled in a net of thick ropes. It was a trap. Raphael caught like a fish and entangled in the ropes, began firing his gun randomly at Marlene. She grabbed the box and crouched in the hole, hiding her head behind a driftwood trunk. A moment later, Marlene peered out from the hiding place. Raphael was staring at her silently and angrily from the trap, and Marlene couldn't keep from laughing, though her knees trembled. Raphael was floundering clumsily in the trap, like a cat in a shopping bag. He tried to free his tangled leg. "I see that your gun isn't even real," the girl said through her laughter. "I'll finish you off anyway," Raphael shouted. "You'd better free me, and we'll do as I suggested. Try to save yourself first, you asshole." Marlene climbed out of the pit, put the box in her backpack, and put down the shovel. Where are you going? The man moaned pathetically. Marlene pretended not to hear him. This is not a joke, Marlene. Raphael threatened her again. Do you realize what kind of people you're messing with? We're not going to leave it like that. What kind of people am I messing with? I guess Sergio's children don't even know about your trip to get the map. You wanted to get everything by yourself. Right, Raphael? What's the difference? Raphael wouldn't stop. I'm not greedy, I'll share it with them. There's enough for everyone. If you want, I can give you a ring. Shove that ring up your ass, well, if anyone finds you here in the next couple of days. Now I know who you really are, Raphael. Do you want me to tell you how everything really happened? Fuck you. I'll tell you. The train is 3 hours away. So, listen. I think you met Sergio by accident. I wouldn't be surprised if it was when you and I were living together. He told stories about his expeditions, but no one took them seriously, except you. But you sensed the prophet, won his trust, and got acquainted with his family. He naively told you about his princess, even showed you a picture of her, and slightly hinted at the existence of a certain box buried somewhere in the woods, which should be returned to its rightful owners, if any are found. But you're impatient. I think you pushed the old man too hard with your questions about the treasure, and he realized in time who you really are and why you were communicating with his daughter. He saw your rotten soul and stopped talking. And then the disease came. Sergio began to lose his memory. You had to act fast. You realized that when he saw me, who looked a lot like his princess, he would trust me. You persuaded your friend and her brother to put their father in the psychiatric hospital in my ward. Maybe if it wasn't for you, they'd have left the old man at home with a nurse. Maybe they're the same bastards as you are. Your plan worked. You realized it when you accidentally met me at the funeral. According to your calculations, we were supposed to meet a little later, so you could find out everything about my conversations with Sergio, but it turned out even better. I told you everything myself in just 5 minutes. You immediately rushed to my apartment and rummaged through all the drawers and shelves, but you didn't realize that the old man's memories looked like a real book. You didn't pay attention to the books. All that was left to do was to watch me and wait for me to get here. That's how it was, Raphael. Am I right? You're a bitch, Marlene, Raphael said in a low voice. I should have killed you silently. You don't have the guts. Marlene said boldly. I hope you can get out without my help because I have to go. Oh, and don't look for me at the apartment. I'm leaving this city for good today, and I'm going to sell my apartment. I really want to start a new happy life. Marlene took her backpack and moved away, but at the edge of the glade she suddenly stopped and turned to Raphael again. I still can't understand one thing in this whole story. Why did you need my underwear? Raphael made a disgruntled grimace, and Marlene walked down the path, laughing loudly. She was not afraid of anything now. She wanted to explore the world and devote herself to traveling. She couldn't imagine her life differently now. The meeting with Sergio had changed her completely and irrevocably.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.